Hey there, and welcome to True Scary Stories. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That helps YouTube know you love creepy stories, and it'll keep sending more your way. Story 1. The Desert Breakdown. Sarah and Mark had been driving through Nevada for 8 hours when their car started making that sound. It began as a soft clicking, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning and the classic rock station they'd been listening to since Reno. Then it grew into something more sinister, a metallic grinding that made Sarah's stomach clench with dread. "Do you hear that?" she asked, turning down the radio. Mark's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I hear it." They were somewhere between Reno and Las Vegas, on Highway 95, surrounded by nothing but scrub brush, an endless desert stretching to purple mountains on the horizon. The landscape had barely changed in the last 3 hours, just mile after mile of sagebrush, Joshua trees, and red dirt under a blazing afternoon sun. Sarah had been looking forward to this road trip for months, planning their route through the Southwest, booking hotels, researching attractions. Now, as the grinding sound grew louder, all those careful plans seemed to be crumbling. "We need to pull over," Mark said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The temperature gauge was creeping into the red zone, the needle climbing steadily toward danger. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "How far to the next town?" Mark squinted at the road signs flashing past. "I don't know. We passed Hawthorne a while back, but that was," he thought for a moment, "at least 40 miles ago." The engine shuddered, and steam began seeping from under the hood. They found a dirt turnoff about a mile later, nothing more than a rough trail that led away from the highway toward a cluster of scraggly mesquite trees. Mark pulled off the asphalt and coasted to a stop, the engine finally falling silent, with what sounded almost like a sigh of relief. Steam was already rising from under the hood when Mark popped it open, waving away the hot vapor with his hand. The radiator had a crack running down its side like a lightning bolt, antifreeze pooling in the dust beneath their feet and filling the desert air with its sickly sweet smell. "Shit," Mark muttered, then caught himself. "Sorry." Sarah was already pulling out her phone, frantically checking for signal bars. Nothing. She held the device up toward the sky, waving it around like some kind of electronic divining rod, but the display stubbornly showed no service. "Try yours," she said. Mark's phone showed the same thing. They were in a dead zone, cut off from the world by miles of empty desert and mountains that blocked cell towers like ancient walls. The sun was getting low, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. But as the light faded, so did the temperature. Sarah had forgotten how cold the desert could get at night. She'd packed for Las Vegas heat, not for spending the night stranded in the middle of nowhere. "Someone will come," Sarah said, but her voice sounded small in the vastness around them. They'd seen maybe 5 cars in the last hour, and none of them had shown any sign of slowing down. Most people drove this stretch of highway as fast as legally possible, eager to get through the emptiness and reach civilization on the other side. They tried to make themselves comfortable in the car as darkness fell. Sarah had grabbed a blanket from the trunk, and they huddled together in the front seats, taking turns trying to sleep. But the desert cold seeped through the windows despite their efforts, and every sound made them jump. The wind whistled through the scrub brush with an almost human voice. Coyotes howled in the distance, their calls echoing off the mountains and seeming to come from all directions at once. Around midnight, something scratched at the car door, not the gentle tapping of a wind-blown branch, but a deliberate scraping sound, like fingernails on metal. Mark grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, aiming the beam out the window. The light cut through the darkness, illuminating only empty desert and dancing shadows. "Nothing there," he whispered, but his hand was shaking. They both knew something had been there. The scratching came again, this time from the back of the car, then from the other side. Something was circling them in the darkness, just beyond the reach of their feeble phone light. By morning, they were shivering and desperate. Sarah's lips were cracked from the dry air and dehydration. Mark's face was sunburned, despite the short time they'd spent outside the car. They had shared a single bottle of water during the night, rationing it carefully, but their supply was running dangerously low. That's when Sarah noticed the footprints in the dust around their car. "Mark," she whispered, grabbing his arm. "Look." They were bare human feet, but wrong somehow. The toes were too long, stretching out like fingers. The heel was too narrow, almost pointed. Most disturbing of all, there were only 4 toes on each foot instead of 5. The prints circled their car 3 times before disappearing into the scrub brush, as if whatever had made them had simply vanished into thin air. Mark stared at the prints, his face pale. "What the hell made those?" "I don't know," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I don't want to find out. We need to start walking," Mark said, trying to inject confidence into his voice. "Someone will pick us up on the highway." They gathered what little they had, the remaining water, some snacks from the glove compartment, Sarah's sun hat, Mark's baseball cap. The asphalt of Highway 95 shimmered in the distance like a black river through the desert. It couldn't be more than a mile away, but in the desert, distances were deceiving. The walk to the highway took longer than expected. What had looked like a simple stroll across flat ground turned into a nightmare of hidden gullies, patches of soft sand that grabbed at their shoes, and thorny plants that tore at their clothes. By the time they reached the road, they were already exhausted, and their water was half gone. They started walking back toward Hawthorne, the last town they remembered seeing. The asphalt was hot even through their shoes, and the sun beat down mercilessly. Cars passed occasionally, but none stopped. The drivers probably saw 2 more tourists who had made the mistake of trying to walk in the desert and didn't want to get involved. After an hour of walking, Sarah was sure they were going in circles. The landmarks all looked the same twisted Joshua tree, the same red rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant, the same dried creek bed that probably hadn't seen water in decades. "We passed that before," she said, pointing at a rusted fence post beside the road. "No, we didn't," Mark insisted, but he didn't sound convinced. He was looking around with growing confusion, as if the landscape itself was playing tricks on them. The sun climbed higher, and their water ran dangerously low. Sarah's lips cracked and bled. Mark stumbled twice in 10 minutes, his coordination failing as dehydration took hold. The desert heat was like a living thing, pressing down on them from above and radiating up from the baking asphalt beneath their feet. And always, just at the edge of their vision, something seemed to be following them, a shadow that moved when there was nothing to cast it, a flicker of movement among the sagebrush, the feeling of being watched by eyes they couldn't see. "There's something out there," Sarah whispered during one of their rest stops. Mark wiped sweat from his forehead and looked around. "I know, I can feel it too." They tried to ignore the sensation and keep walking, but it was like trying to ignore an itch you couldn't scratch. The presence was always there, keeping pace with them, watching and waiting for something. By noon, when the sun was directly overhead and their shadows had shrunk to small pools at their feet, they heard the rumble of an engine, not the distant whoosh of a car on the highway, but the deep growl of something bigger, something closer. A pickup truck appeared like a mirage, dust clouds trailing behind it as it approached on a dirt road that Sarah was sure hadn't been there before. The truck was old, maybe from the 1970s, with rust eating through the paint and a windshield spider-webbed with cracks. The driver was an old man with deep-set eyes and skin like leather that had been left too long in the sun. He wore a straw cowboy hat with a band made of what looked like rattlesnake skin. When he smiled, his teeth were the color of old ivory. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice like sandpaper on wood. "Yes," Sarah said gratefully. "Our radiator cracked. We've been walking for hours." "Climb on up," the old man said, gesturing to the truck bed. "I'll give you folks a ride." They climbed into the back of the truck, grateful beyond words to be off their feet. The metal was hot against their skin, but they didn't care. Anything was better than walking through the desert sun. But as they drove, Sarah noticed they weren't heading toward any town she recognized. The road got rougher, bouncing them around in the truck bed like dice in a cup. Then it turned to dirt, then became barely a trail at all, winding between massive boulders and through stands of Joshua trees that seemed to lean in toward them like curious spectators. "Where are we going?" Sarah called to the driver. He didn't answer. In the side mirror, she could see his eyes, black holes in his weathered face, reflecting nothing. The truck climbed higher into the mountains, following a path that seemed impossible for any vehicle to navigate. The air grew thinner and cooler, and Sarah realized they were farther from the highway now than when they had started. They should have been heading towards civilization, not away from it. The truck finally stopped at a cluster of mobile homes that looked like they had been abandoned for decades. Rust stains ran down their sides like dried blood. Windows were boarded up with sheets of plywood covered in graffiti that hurt to look at directly. Some of the trailers had collapsed entirely, their roofs caved in, and their walls split open like broken eggs. There was no power line, no phone line, no satellite dish, no sign that anyone had lived here in years. "Here we are," the old man said, his voice cheerful despite the desolation around them. "You can rest here." Sarah felt ice in her veins despite the desert heat. Something was very wrong with this place. The shadows fell in directions that didn't match the sun's position. The air tasted of copper and decay, and from somewhere among the ruined trailers came a sound like whispered singing in a language she didn't recognize. Mark grabbed Sarah's hand, his fingers tight around hers. They jumped out of the truck bed and ran. Behind them they heard laughter that didn't sound quite human. Too high, too sharp, with harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. The sound followed them as they ran through the scrub brush, stumbling over rocks and dodging between the skeletal arms of dead trees. They ran until their lungs burned, until their legs gave out, until they collapsed in the shade of a massive boulder that provided blessed relief from the sun. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. "What was that place?" she gasped. Mark shook his head, unable to speak. They sat in the shade for what felt like hours, afraid to move, afraid that the old man and his impossible truck might still be hunting for them. When the sun finally set, painting the desert in shades of red and gold, they saw lights in the distance. Real lights. The harsh fluorescent glow of a gas station sign, the warm yellow rectangles of windows, the familiar red and blue of a corporate logo. They stumbled toward the lights, supporting each other when their legs threatened to give out. The gas station was exactly what they needed to see. Normal, modern, real. A few cars were parked at the pumps, and through the windows they could see people buying snacks and drinks, living their ordinary lives. The attendant was a young man with kind eyes and a name tag that read Dave. He stared at them as they stumbled through the door, sunburned, dehydrated, their clothes torn and dirty. "Jesus, where did you folks come from?" he asked. Sarah tried to explain about the car breakdown, about the old man in the truck, about the abandoned trailer park in the mountains. But as she spoke, Dave's expression grew more and more confused. "Trailer park," he said. "There ain't no trailer park around here. Ain't nothing out there but desert. Hasn't been for 20 years. But we were just there," Mark insisted. "An old man in a pickup truck took us there." Dave shook his head slowly. "Mister, I've lived in this area my whole life. My daddy worked for the county, drove every road within 50 miles of here. There's no trailer park.
No settlement. Nothing. Just desert and mountains. He pulled out a detailed topographic map and spread it on the counter. "Show me where you think you went." Sarah and Mark studied the map, but nothing looked familiar. The terrain shown was all wilderness. No roads, no buildings, no signs of human habitation in the direction they had traveled. "Maybe you got turned around," Dave suggested gently. "Desert can play tricks on you, especially when you're dehydrated. Heat exhaustion can make you see things that ain't there." But Sarah knew what she had seen. The trailer park had been real as the gas station around her now. The old man had been real. The laughter that had followed them through the desert had been real. Dave let them use his phone to call for help. A tow truck arrived within an hour, and they rode back to their broken-down car in air-conditioned comfort. The driver, a cheerful man named Pete, chatted about the weather and local attractions as if nothing unusual had happened. Their car was exactly where they had left it, the cracked radiator still leaking antifreeze into the dust. Pete hooked it up to his tow truck and gave them a ride back to Hawthorne, where they spent the night in a small motel while waiting for repairs. The next morning, over breakfast at a local diner, Sarah asked their waitress about abandoned settlements in the area. "Oh honey," the waitress said, refilling their coffee cups, "there's all kinds of stories about this part of Nevada. Old mining camps, ghost towns, places that just up and disappeared one day. Desert's got a long memory, and sometimes that memory gets confused with the present." "What do you mean?" Mark asked. "Well," the waitress lowered her voice conspiratorially, "some folks say there are places out there that exist in more than one time at once. Places where the past and present get all mixed up. You might think you're seeing something that's there now, but really you're seeing something that used to be there, or maybe something that never was there at all." She straightened up and smiled. "Course, that's just local folklore, probably just heat mirages and desert madness. Happens to tourists or..." But as she walked away, Sarah caught her reflection in the diner's window. For just a moment, she could swear she saw something else reflected behind them. The shadow of an old man in a cowboy hat, watching them with eyes like black holes. They got their car fixed and continued their trip to Las Vegas, but neither of them ever forgot their night in the Nevada desert. Sometimes, years later, Sarah would dream about the trailer park that didn't exist, about the old man whose laughter still echoed in her memory, about the footprints with 4 toes that had circled their car in the darkness. The desert, she learned, had its own rules, its own logic, its own way of welcoming strangers who ventured too far from the safety of the highway. And sometimes, if you were very unlucky, you might discover that some places exist only for those who are desperate enough to find them.
Story 2. The fog. Jenny was driving home from visiting her sister in Portland when the fog rolled in. It started as wisps along the Columbia River, then thickened until she could barely see the yellow lines on the highway. She slowed to 30 miles per hour, then 20, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her fingers ached. The radio crackled with static. She tried to find a weather report, but all she could get was fragments of voices speaking in languages she didn't recognize. Outside her headlight beams, the world had disappeared completely. She'd been driving for what felt like hours when she saw the red taillights ahead. Another car, moving slowly through the fog just like her. She felt a wave of relief. At least she wasn't alone out here. But as she followed the lights, something felt wrong. They never got closer or farther away, no matter how she adjusted her speed. And the road seemed to be curving in ways she didn't remember. She'd driven this route dozens of times. It should have been mostly straight through the gorge. The taillights turned right onto what looked like an exit ramp. Jenny hesitated. She didn't remember an exit here, but maybe she was more lost than she thought. The fog was so thick, she couldn't see any signs. She followed. The road got narrower, winding through trees she couldn't see but could sense pressing close on both sides. The pavement was rough, full of potholes that jolted her car. This didn't feel like a state highway anymore. The tail lights stopped. Jenny stopped too, leaving her engine running. Through the fog she could make out the dim shape of a building, a diner, maybe, or a gas station. She couldn't see any lights inside, but the other car was there, parked right in front. She got out, the fog immediately soaking through her jacket. Her footsteps sounded muffled and strange. The building was old, its windows dark and empty, paint peeled from its walls. A sign hung crooked above the door, but the fog was too thick to read it. The other car was a sedan, dark blue or black. Its engine was still running, the exhaust mixing with the fog, but there was no one inside. "Hello," Jenny called out. Her voice seemed to be swallowed by the fog before it traveled more than a few feet. "Hello, is anyone there?" She approached the building. The door was slightly open, hanging on rusty hinges. Inside, she could see the dim shapes of tables and chairs, all covered in dust and cobwebs. This place had been abandoned for years. A sound made her turn. Footsteps, coming from somewhere in the fog. Slow, deliberate steps on gravel. "Hello," she called again. "I followed your car. Are you okay?" The footsteps stopped, then they started again. Closer now, but she still couldn't see who was making them. Jenny backed toward her car. The footsteps followed, matching her pace exactly. When she stopped, they stopped. When she moved, they moved. She ran. Her car door slammed shut, and she gunned the engine, spinning gravel as she pulled away from the building. In her rearview mirror, she thought she saw a figure standing in the fog where her car had been, but it might have been a trick of the swirling mist. She drove fast down the narrow road, desperate to find the highway again. But the road kept winding, kept turning, leading her deeper into the fog-shrouded woods. And always, just at the edge of her vision, she could see those red tail lights ahead of her. The same tail lights, the same distance away. She tried to turn around twice, but both times the road was too narrow, the ditches too steep, and when she tried to stop and figure out where she was, she would hear those footsteps again, coming out of the fog. Hours passed, her gas gauge dropped, the fog never lifted. Finally, just as her tank was nearly empty, she saw a different light ahead, not red tail lights, but the yellow glow of a gas station. She pulled in, hands shaking as she turned off the engine. The attendant was an elderly man, with kind eyes. "You look shook up, miss. Everything all right?" "The fog," she managed. "I got lost in the fog." He looked out at the clear night sky, stars visible through the windows. "What fog?" Story 3. The hitchhiker David picked up the hitchhiker outside of Bakersfield. It was raining hard, and the man looked soaked through. His thumb stuck out hopefully as cars zoomed past in the California downpour. David had always been the type to help people, so he pulled over. "Thanks, man," the hitchhiker said as he climbed in. He was maybe 30, with dark hair and pale skin. His clothes were old but clean, and he carried a small canvas backpack. "I'm trying to get to Fresno." "No problem," David said. "I'm heading that way." The hitchhiker introduced himself as Marcus. He was quiet at first, just staring out at the rain-soaked farmland rolling past. But after a while, he started talking. He had an interesting life story, had traveled all over the country, worked different jobs, met all kinds of people. David found himself enjoying the conversation. They stopped for gas in a small town, and Marcus bought them both coffee. He seemed like a decent guy, maybe just down on his luck. When they got back on the road, Marcus asked if David minded making a small detour. "I've got a friend who lives just off the highway," Marcus said. "Haven't seen him in years. Would mean a lot if I could drop by and say hello." David agreed. Marcus directed him off Highway 99, onto a county road that wound through orange groves. The rain had stopped, but clouds still covered the moon, making the night dark as ink. "Turn here," Marcus said, pointing to a dirt road that disappeared between the trees. David hesitated. The road looked rough, and he was driving his brother's car, a Honda Civic that wasn't meant for off-roading. But Marcus seemed insistent, and it was just a quick visit, right? The dirt road was full of potholes and ruts. Tree branches scraped against the car's roof. They drove for what felt like miles without seeing any houses or lights. "You sure this is right?" David asked. "Oh yeah," Marcus said. "He likes his privacy." Finally, they came to a clearing, where a small farmhouse sat in the darkness. There were no lights on, no car in the driveway. The place looked deserted. "Looks like he's not home," David said. "He's here," Marcus said. "He's always here." Something in Marcus's tone made David nervous. The friendliness had gone out of his voice, replaced by something flat and cold. Marcus got out of the car and walked toward the house. David sat there, engine running, unsure what to do. After a few minutes, Marcus came back. "He wants to meet you," Marcus said. "I really should get going," David said. "It's getting late." "Come on," Marcus insisted. "Just for a minute." David looked at the dark house again. Every instinct told him to drive away, but Marcus was still standing by the passenger door, not getting in. "I'll just wait here," David said. Marcus's expression changed. The mask of friendliness slipped completely away, revealing something ugly underneath. "I said he wants to meet you." David put the car in reverse, but Marcus was suddenly at the driver's side window, his face pressed against the glass. In the dashboard light, his skin looked waxy and wrong, like it didn't fit quite right over his bones. "Don't be rude," Marcus said, his voice muffled by the glass. David gunned it backward, tires spinning in the dirt. Marcus stepped away from the car, but he was smiling now, not a human smile, too wide, with too many teeth. David turned the car around and raced back down the dirt road, branches slapping at the windshield. Behind him, he could hear laughter echoing through the trees. He didn't slow down until he reached the highway. Only then did he notice the smell in the car, something rotten and sweet, like flowers left too long in standing water. He drove straight to Fresno without stopping, checking his rearview mirror constantly, but Marcus was gone. The only sign he'd ever been there was the smell, and the muddy footprints on the floor mat. David never picked up another hitchhiker, but sometimes, on rainy nights, he thought he saw a familiar figure by the side of the road, thumb stuck out hopefully, as cars passed by in the dark. Story 4. Wrong Turn in West Virginia. The GPS died somewhere outside of Charleston, West Virginia. Lisa and her boyfriend Tom had been driving to Virginia Beach for a long weekend, taking the scenic route through the mountains. When the screen went black, they pulled over to check the paper map. Tom's father had insisted they bring. "We're somewhere here," Tom said, pointing to a tangle of back roads in the Appalachian foothills. "If we just follow this road, it should connect back to the interstate." The road wound higher into the mountains, getting narrower and more isolated with each mile. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to dirt, barely wide enough for one car. Pine trees pressed close on both sides, blocking out most of the afternoon sun. "This doesn't feel right," Lisa said. They hadn't seen another car, or even a house, for over an hour. "It's fine," Tom insisted, but he didn't sound convinced. "These mountain roads all connect eventually." That's when they saw the town. It appeared suddenly around a sharp curve, a collection of weathered buildings, clustered in a valley between two ridges. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, and they could see people moving around between the buildings. It looked like something from another century. "Thank God," Lisa said. We can ask for directions. They drove down the main street slowly. The buildings were old, not antique old, but genuinely ancient, with hand-hewn logs and roofs made of rusted tin. The people they saw looked normal enough from a distance, but as they got closer, Lisa noticed something odd about them. They all stopped what they were doing to stare at the car, not just glancing over, but turning their bodies completely to face them, standing motionless as they passed. Men, women, children, all with the same blank expression, all watching. "This is weird," Lisa muttered. Tom pulled up in front of what looked like a general store. An old man sat on the porch in a rocking chair, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up as they approached, and Lisa saw that his eyes were completely white, not blind, but actually white, like milk. "Excuse me," Tom called out. "We're looking for the interstate. Can you tell us how to get there?" The old man smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous. "Interstate," he said. "Don't know nothing about no interstate." Other people had started gathering. They came out of buildings and from around corners, all moving with the same strange jerky gait. A woman in a faded dress, a man in overalls that might have been blue once, children who looked too old for their size. "We should go," Lisa whispered, but when Tom tried to start the car, it wouldn't turn over. The engine cranked, but didn't catch. He tried again, then again, panic creeping into his movements. "Car trouble?" asked the old man, still smiling his sharp-toothed smile. More people had gathered. They formed a loose circle around the car, just watching, not threatening exactly, but definitely not welcoming either. "Just need to check something," Tom said. He popped the hood and got out. Lisa stayed in the car, doors locked. As he peered at the engine, the distributor cap was gone. Tom looked around. One of the men in the crowd was holding something in his hand, a small plastic cap with wires attached. "Looking for this?" the man asked. "Give it back," Tom said. "Oh, we will," said the old man from the porch. "Eventually. Right now, you're our guests, and we don't get many guests way up here." Lisa started the car again, and this time it caught. Tom jumped in, and she gunned it, scattering the crowd. In the rearview mirror, she could see them standing in the road, watching the car disappear around the curve. They drove for hours, following dirt roads that seemed to lead nowhere. Every turn brought them to another dead end, or another impossibly narrow track through the trees. It was like the mountains themselves were conspiring to trap them. As night fell, they saw lights ahead, the same cluster of buildings, the same people standing in the same places, as if they'd never moved at all. "How is that possible?" Lisa said. "We drove for hours." The old man was still on his porch, still whittling. He waved at them as they passed, and in the headlights, Lisa could see his white eyes gleaming like pearls. They tried a different road this time, but the result was the same. No matter which way they went, all roads led back to that terrible little town in the valley. On the third time through, Tom stopped the car and got out. "What do you want?" he shouted at the old man. "Just company," the old man said. "Gets lonely up here. People pass through sometimes, but they never stay. We just want them to stay." "We can't stay," Lisa called from the car. "People are expecting us. They'll come looking." The old man laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "Nobody comes looking up here, honey. Nobody even knows this place exists. Hell, most days, I'm not sure it exists myself." That's when Lisa noticed something that made her blood freeze. In front of the general store, almost hidden by the gathering crowd, were 3 other cars. Old models, covered in rust and dirt, their tires flat and windows broken. And sitting behind the wheel of one of them was a skeleton in a rotted dress, its empty sockets turned toward their car, as if still watching the road. Story 5. The rest stop. Michelle needed to stretch her legs after driving for 6 hours straight. She'd been making good time from Denver to Phoenix, but the endless flat highway through southern Colorado was making her drowsy. When she saw the rest stop sign, she decided to pull over. The rest stop was small and run down, just a cinder block building with bathrooms and a few picnic tables. Her car was the only one in the parking lot, which wasn't surprising given how remote this stretch of highway was. The sun was setting, painting the desert around them, orange and pink. She used the bathroom quickly. It was clean enough, but gave her the creeps. The fluorescent lights hummed and flickered, and there were scratches in the metal store doors that looked almost like writing, though she couldn't make out what they said. Back outside, she grabbed a soda from her cooler and sat at one of the picnic tables to check her phone. No signal, of course. She was in the middle of nowhere. That's when she heard the car. It came from the south, engine roaring as it approached the rest stop. A big sedan, dark-colored, driving fast. It pulled into the parking lot with squealing tires and stopped next to her car. 3 men got out. They were rough-looking, wearing dirty clothes and baseball caps pulled low over their eyes. The driver was tall and thin, with a scraggly beard. The other 2 were shorter, but built like bulldogs. Michelle's instincts screamed danger. She stood up casually and started walking toward her car, trying not to look scared. "Hey there," called the tall one. "Nice evening, isn't it?" "Yes," Michelle said, not stopping, just heading out. But when she reached her car, she saw that one of the short men had somehow gotten there first. He was leaning against her door, blocking her way. "What's the hurry?" he asked. His breath smelled like beer and cigarettes. "I need to get going," Michelle said, trying to keep her voice steady. "People are expecting me." The tall man laughed. "People are always expecting somebody, but nobody's expecting you to show up tonight, are they? Long drive to Phoenix, lot of empty road between here and there." Michelle's heart pounded. How did he know where she was going? She looked around desperately. The rest stop was isolated, surrounded by miles of empty desert. The nearest town was at least 50 miles away, and it was getting dark fast. "Look," she said, "I don't want any trouble." "No trouble," said the third man, who had been quiet until now. "We just want to talk." But the way they were positioned around her, one blocking her car, the other 2 cutting off her escape routes, told a different story. Michelle ran. She sprinted toward the bathroom building, hoping to lock herself inside until they gave up and left. But the tall man was faster than he looked. He caught her arm just as she reached the door. "Now where are you going?" he said. His grip was like iron. Michelle screamed as loud as she could, but there was no one to hear. The sound echoed off the cinder block walls and died in the vast emptiness of the desert. That's when the lights went out. Not just the rest stop lights, every light she could see. Her car's interior lights, the distant glow of a radio tower, even the stars seemed to dim. The world plunged into a darkness, so complete it was like being blind. In the darkness, she heard the men's voices change. The confident aggression turned to confusion, then fear. "What the hell?" one of them said. "Where are the lights? I can't see anything." Michelle felt the hand on her arm loosen. She pulled free and stumbled away in the darkness, her hand stretched out in front of her. Behind her she could hear the men arguing, their voices getting farther away. Then she heard something else, footsteps in the darkness, but not the heavy boots of the men who had cornered her. These were lighter, softer, like bare feet on concrete, and there were a lot of them. "Who's there?" called the tall man. His voice cracked with panic. The footsteps circled them in the darkness. Michelle pressed herself against what felt like a wall, holding her breath. Something brushed past her in the dark, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the movement in the air. One of the men screamed. It was a high, terrified sound that cut through the night like a knife. Then another scream, from a different direction. "Help me," someone shouted. "Something's got me." The sounds of struggle came from all around, running footsteps, panicked breathing, something being dragged across gravel, but Michelle couldn't see any of it. The darkness was absolute. Slowly, Gradually, the sounds faded away. The screaming stopped. The footsteps receded into silence. Michelle waited, pressed against the wall, afraid to move or make a sound. Hours seemed to pass. Then, as suddenly as they had gone out, the lights came back on. She was standing next to the bathroom building. The parking lot was empty, except for her car. The men's sedan was gone, as if it had never been there at all. Michelle ran to her car and drove away as fast as she could, not stopping until she reached the lights of a town. She never reported what happened. Who would believe her? But sometimes when she told the story to friends, they would look it up online. That rest stop they found had a history. Over the years, several people had disappeared there, all of them predators, criminals, people who hurt others. The locals had a name for it, the hunting ground. They said something lived there in the desert, something that protected the innocent and punished those who would do them harm. Michelle never knew if that was true, but she remembered those soft footsteps in the darkness, and the way whatever was out there had passed her by without harming her. Some roads, she realized, had their own justice. Story 6. Radio signals. Jack was driving through Wyoming at 3 a.m. when his radio started picking up the signal. He'd been scanning through static for the past hour, trying to find anything to keep him awake on the long haul from Salt Lake City to Chicago. The highway stretched empty in both directions, nothing but sagebrush and darkness under a cloudy sky. At first, it sounded like another trucker's CB radio bleeding through, a man's voice, calm and conversational, talking about the weather and road conditions. But as Jack listened, something felt off about it. Eastbound traffic should be aware of the incident at mile marker 347, the voice was saying. Vehicle fire reported. Emergency crews responding. Expect delays. Jack looked at his odometer. He was at mile marker 340, just 7 miles from where the voice said there was an accident, but he couldn't see any fire, any flashing lights, any sign of trouble ahead. He grabbed his CB radio and tried to respond. Breaker, this is Red Dog, eastbound at mile marker 340. I don't see any accident ahead. Can you confirm that incident at 347? Static answered him. He tried again, but got nothing. The voice on the radio continued its report. Also be advised, eastbound driver in the red Peterbilt, you've got a problem with your left rear trailer tire. Looks like it's running low. Might want to pull over and check that before it blows. Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He was driving a red Peterbilt, but how could anyone see his tires in this darkness? He looked in his mirrors, but the highway behind him was empty. No other trucks, no cars, nothing. He pulled over at the next exit and walked around his rig with a flashlight. The left rear trailer tire was indeed low, maybe 20 pounds down from where it should be. If he'd kept driving, it probably would have blown within the next 100 miles. Back in the cab, the voice was still talking. Good call on that tire check, Red Dog. Should keep you rolling safe now, but you might want to top off your fuel at the next truck stop. You're running lower than you think. Jack looked at his fuel gauge. It showed 3/4 full, but truck gauges weren't always accurate. The voice seemed to know things it shouldn't know. Who is this? Jack said into his CB. How do you know about my truck? This time the voice seemed to hear him. Just looking out for a fellow driver, Red Dog. Roads can be dangerous late at night. Good to have someone watching your back. As Jack drove on, the voice continued providing updates. It warned him about a state trooper running radar at mile marker 365. It told him about a drunk driver weaving in the eastbound lane near Laramie. It advised him to take the bypass around Cheyenne due to construction. Every warning proved accurate. Every piece of advice was solid, but Jack never saw the source of the information. No other trucks, no aircraft, no way for anyone to be watching the highway with such detail. Near dawn, as Jack was approaching the Nebraska border, the voice came through again. Red Dog, you're going to want to pull over at the next rest area. There's something you need to see. What do you mean? Jack asked. Just trust me on this one. The rest area was a small one, just bathrooms and a picnic area surrounded by cottonwood trees. As Jack parked, he noticed another truck in the lot, an old Kenworth with faded red paint and chrome that had seen better days. There was something familiar about it, but he couldn't place what. He walked over to look at the truck more closely. The cab was empty, but the driver's door was open. Inside, he could see a CB radio, its microphone hanging from a coiled cord. The radio was on, its display glowing green in the pre-dawn darkness. On the dashboard was a small memorial card, the kind they gave out at funerals. Jack picked it up and read it in the light from his phone. William Big Bill Henderson, 1952 to 2019. Loving father, devoted trucker, guardian angel of the highway. Below the text was a photo of a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a gray beard. Jack recognized the face immediately. It was his Uncle Bill, who had taught him to drive truck 15 years ago. Uncle Bill had died in a crash on this very stretch of highway. Jack remembered the funeral, remembered his aunt saying that Bill would have wanted to keep driving forever, that the road was his life. The CB radio in the old Kenworth crackled to life. "Been good riding with you tonight, nephew," came the familiar voice. "But I think you can handle the rest of the trip on your own." Jack stared at the radio, his hands shaking. "Uncle Bill, roads are different at night," the voice said. "Things happen out here that can't happen anywhere else. Sometimes the dead keep watch over the living. Sometimes love is stronger than physics." The radio went silent. Then Jack tried to respond. All he got was static. He stood there for a long time, holding the memorial card, watching the sunrise paint the Nebraska plains gold. Finally he walked back to his truck and climbed into the cab. His CB radio was quiet for the rest of the trip to Chicago, but sometimes, late at night, on long hauls through empty country, Jack would scan through the frequencies and listen for that familiar voice, still watching over drivers on the dark highways, still keeping them safe. Some guardian angels, he learned, wore trucker hats and drove 18-wheelers through the night. Some roads, she realized, had their own justice.
Story 7. The Passenger. Elena picked up the passenger through a rideshare app just outside of Albuquerque. She'd been driving for the company for 6 months, making extra money while she finished nursing school. The late-night rides paid the best, even though they sometimes made her nervous. The pickup was at a gas station on the outskirts of town. The passenger was listed as Michael R., and he was going to Santa Fe, a good fare, worth about $80. Elena pulled into the lot and looked around for someone matching the description. White male, brown hair, wearing a blue jacket. She saw him standing by the air pump, exactly as described. He waved when he saw her car and walked over with a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Elena?" he asked as he got in the back seat. "That's me," she said. "Going to Santa Fe?" "Yeah, thanks for picking me up so late. I know it's a long drive." Michael seemed normal enough, polite, soft-spoken, maybe in his 30s. He settled into the back seat quietly and pulled out his phone. Elena started the GPS and pulled out of the gas station parking lot. The drive to Santa Fe normally took about an hour on Highway 285. It was a route Elena knew well, mostly straight through high desert country dotted with small towns. At this time of night, nearly midnight, there wouldn't be much traffic. They'd been driving for about 20 minutes when Michael spoke up from the back seat. "You mind if I ask you something?" "Sure," Elena said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Do you ever get scared driving people around at night? I mean, you never really know who you're picking up." Something in his tone made Elena's stomach tighten. "Not really," she lied. "The app does background checks." "Does it?" Michael asked. "That's interesting. Because I was wondering what would show up if someone ran a background check on me." Elena checked her phone. They were still 40 minutes from Santa Fe, driving through empty desert. The nearest town was 20 miles ahead. "I'm sure you're fine," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "Am I?" Michael's reflection smiled at her in the rearview mirror. "How can you be sure?" Elena's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Look, if you're trying to scare me. I'm not trying to scare you, Michael said. I'm just curious about how these things work. Like, what happens if a driver picks up the wrong person? Someone dangerous? There are safety features, Elena said. GPS tracking, emergency buttons. But you're out here alone with me, Michael interrupted. Miles from anywhere. If I wanted to hurt you, who would stop me? Elena's heart was racing now. She looked at her phone, trying to figure out if she could call for help without him noticing. But her hands were shaking too much to operate the touch screen while driving. You're right to be scared, Michael said conversationally. You should be scared. Do you want to know why? Elena didn't answer. She pressed harder on the gas pedal, desperate to reach the next town. I killed my last driver, Michael said. 3 weeks ago, outside of Denver. Nice woman, about your age. She picked me up at a hotel and never made it to the destination. Elena's breath came in short gasps. You're lying. Am I? Her name was Jessica Chin. 26 years old, trying to pay her way through law school. They found her car in a ravine off Highway 36. Still haven't found all the pieces of her body. Elena looked for somewhere to pull over, somewhere with lights and people. But there was nothing but empty highways stretching ahead. The thing is, Michael continued, I really didn't want to hurt her. She seemed like a nice person. But once you start talking to someone, really talking, you learn things about them. And Jessica, well, let's just say she wasn't as nice as she seemed. What do you mean? Elena whispered. She was stealing from her passengers. Credit card numbers, personal information, whatever she could get. Using her access to their phones and wallets while they slept in the back seat. Jessica was funding law school by ruining people's lives. Elena blinked in confusion. That didn't sound right. Rideshare drivers didn't have access to passengers' phones or wallets. So you see, Michael went on, sometimes the passenger isn't the dangerous one. Sometimes it's the driver you have to worry about. In the rearview mirror, Elena saw Michael lean forward. But instead of threatening her, he was holding up a small recording device. This entire conversation has been recorded, he said, along with your admission that you're stealing from passengers. What? I never said that. Listen to yourself, Michael said, and played back a snippet of audio. Elena heard her own voice saying, there are safety features. GPS tracking, emergency buttons, but you're out here alone with me. If I wanted to hurt you, who would stop me? But that wasn't what she had said. The recording had been edited, her words rearranged to make it sound like she was threatening him. Who are you? Elena demanded. Someone who investigates rideshare crimes, Michael said. And you've been flagged for suspicious activity. Multiple reports of passengers having their credit cards compromised after rides with you. Phones going missing. Identity theft. That's not true, isn't it? What about Robert Martinez last month? He took a ride with you from the airport, fell asleep in your car. Woke up to find his wallet had been gone through. Credit cards maxed out within hours. Elena's blood ran cold. She did remember that passenger he'd been drunk and had passed out in her back seat. But she hadn't touched his wallet. Had she? And Sarah Kim 2 weeks ago, Michael continued, lost her phone after a ride with you. Phone that contained private photos that somehow ended up posted online. I don't know what you're talking about, Elena said, but her voice sounded weak even to herself. The evidence says otherwise. Bank records, security footage, digital forensics. You've been very careful, but not careful enough. Elena pulled over at a 24-hour truck stop, her hands shaking. Get out of my car. I'm not done yet, Michael said. You see, I'm not just investigating you. I'm here to make sure you never hurt anyone else. I haven't hurt anyone. Michael showed her his phone. On the screen was a video of Elena in her car, reaching into a passenger's purse while the woman slept in the back seat. The timestamp showed it was from last week. How do you have that? Elena whispered. Hidden cameras. We've been watching you for months. Every theft, every violation of trust, every life you've damaged for a few extra dollars." Elena stared at the video, her mind reeling. She didn't remember doing that. But there she was on the screen, clear as day, rifling through someone's belongings. "The question now," Michael said, "is what happens next? I could turn this evidence over to the police. You'd go to prison, lose everything. Or what? You disappear. Tonight. Leave the state, never drive for another rideshare company, never contact any of your victims again. Start over somewhere far away and try to become a better person." Elena looked around the truck stop parking lot. There were people here, witnesses. She could scream for help. But help from what? Michael wasn't threatening violence. He was just showing her the truth about herself. "I don't understand," she said. "How do I not remember doing these things?" "Stress does funny things to memory," Michael said. "Financial pressure, desperation, guilt, it can make people do things they later block out. The mind protects itself by forgetting what it can't accept." Elena looked at the video again. It was definitely her, but it felt like watching a stranger. "What if I don't run? What if I stay and face the consequences? Then you'll destroy more lives while the legal system moves slowly. And some of the people you've hurt, they're not the kind to wait for justice. They're looking for revenge." As if on cue, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We know where you live. We know what you did. You have 24 hours. "How did they get my number?" she whispered. "Same way you got theirs," Michael said. "Information isn't as private as people think." Elena closed her eyes, trying to process everything. When she opened them again, Michael was gone. The back seat was empty, his duffel bag nowhere to be seen. She looked around the parking lot, but there was no sign of him. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was the rideshare app, showing that Michael had rated her ride and left a tip. But according to the app, she'd already dropped him off in Santa Fe an hour ago. Elena checked the GPS history. It showed her driving straight to Santa Fe without stopping, completing the trip in exactly 1 hour. But she was still sitting in the truck stop parking lot, 40 minutes away from her supposed destination. She drove home in a daze, her mind spinning with questions that had no answers. Was Michael real? Were the videos real? Had she really been stealing from passengers? Or was this all some elaborate psychological game? The next morning, Elena found an envelope under her door. Inside was a bus ticket to Portland, Oregon, and a note that read, "New city, new life, new chances to do better. Don't waste them." She never drove for another rideshare company. She never found out who Michael really was or how he'd done what he'd done. But sometimes, late at night, she would remember that conversation in the car and wonder if some passengers were more than they seemed. Some people, she realized, weren't just along for the ride. They were there to make sure the journey ended the way it was supposed to. Elena took the bus to Portland and started over. She finished nursing school and became the kind of person who helped others instead of hurting them. And she never forgot the lesson she'd learned on that strange night in New Mexico. Sometimes the most terrifying passengers are the ones who show you who you really are.